This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight, once again, the famous Dr. Buck Melton, who many may know is a potential vice presidential candidate.
I feel like I'm being drafted here.
Well, what would happen if there are people out there in TV land that wanted to send you money, Bucky? I mean, would you take any money?
I'd have to account for it. That's too
That's just
complicated.
some money came in.
So,
Do you have to report that? Just some money?
I think it's probably so. I think it's a terrible commentary, though, on American life that people are dodging public service because of what it opens them up to.
Of course,
so,
it's terrible.
No money, guys, please. Thank you for your kind wishes.
We could put your I don't know, box number up right on the screen here. And
Don't make me hurt you right here in front of the TV
send
audience.
money in. We could report in
No.
as to how much was raised on a weekly basis. Well, so much for our little frivolity here. We've had a pretty interesting conversation about freedom, and we talked about freedom of speech. Let's now talk about Norman Lincoln Rockwell's famous paintings. There are 4 of them, and one of them is really powerful. One of my favorite, freedom of speech. It was sort of a worker standing up there in a New England town meeting. He's transfixed. He had in his worker's jacket some documents, and everyone had turned to listen to what he had to say respectfully, and he was transfigured by the experience. That's a wonderful sort of part of the American dialogue. Another one was, in these 4 freedoms, which were produced when the nation was under a tremendous assault and peril from totalitarian societies attacking. And so the idea was, this is what Americans are. These are things that we value. This makes us different than other places. And one of them was freedom for fear. And as I recollect this, there was parents and they had their sleeping child. And the idea that you could be protected, and that would be an important part of freedom, is that you're protected from something. So we had our, maybe an analogy about the little circle from our last conversation about this, a little circle around each person, and in this sphere, they could basically exercise freedom to do as they wish, with the caveat they didn't injure other people, and they would also be protected from things in their little sphere of being. And what are some things that we might be protected from, and who protects us, and is that part of American freedom? And who are our protectors that protect us from things we're afraid of? Who would that be? Can you name? Obviously, the parents.
Yes.
Obviously, the idea is that your parents are going to be there to protect you. This is the analogy.
The patrie, the government itself, is that the direction we're going in here?
Well, you could say there are a lot of protective organisms in the country. Yes, we'll finally sail the ship there. But you have family is going to protect you. Religious entities will protect you. Well-wishers of all types will be there to protect you. And then finally, probably the biggest protector would be the government and its power. And it appears that that's often a very good thing. What are some protections the government grants us? Yeah, you can name a few?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to mind, and of course I'm not just looking at the last few years or even the last few decades. I go back to the founding period and beyond. It would be protection from foreign threats, however you care to define that. And probably the first foreign threat that I can think of was England itself. That was the fundamental transformation of the American Revolution from the beginnings when, as late as the 1760s, we were proud to see ourselves as subjects of the British Empire. And within another 10 years, the balance had shifted to seeing the British Empire, England, Parliament, King George himself, as a foreign threat to our way of life. and therefore it was up to George Washington and the Continental Army, and perhaps our allies, the French, to defend us from that.
And they were, the things they were to be defended from, I mean, a major one were taxes. So the government were going to take money, so we're sort of protecting our property.
Yes.
And so where the king overstepped his, and I think the obvious villain in the situation was the king, King George III, and he didn't do himself any good. If you've seen the crowns which were circulated in wealthy circles during his reign, they had his picture. He certainly looked like, I make the joke, any South Georgia farmer. This is the way the king looks, and shall we say he looked a bit froppish, yes, with long hair, hardly a person that you would easily genuflect to if you're a hardy frontiersman, to see the picture of this guy several thousand miles away is attempting to orchestrate your life. So yes, and I think the point would be the government presumably will protect you from the fear that you have of other countries coming in and dominating things. Let's see, what's the Red Dawn? The idea that the movie, all right, it's a great movie. The high school football team fights the Cubans in Colorado or wherever they're up to. The Russians, the Cubans have come in there,
but that's something new. And I want to look at that for a minute, because of course the Four Freedoms began. Rockwell memorialized them in those paintings. But the Four Freedoms idea, if I remember correctly, began with Franklin D. Roosevelt himself in his Four Freedoms speech.
Yes.
And he put forward freedom from fear, and of course that harkens back to his very famous first inaugural. Let me repeat my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Fear of what? Fear of the terrible economic conditions, yes, and the Depression. Yes. So that seems to be the genesis of freedom from fear. I would say that that's not really a part of the traditional American ideals up to that point. As Edward Murrow said during the Cold War, I think during McCarthyism, and this has always rung very strongly with me, we must remember we are not, and not to be gender neutral here, we are not descended from fearful men. You talked about the South Georgia frontiersmen. Frontiersmen were not known for being fearful. That the English who came here, and to a lesser degree the Scots, the Germans who came here, they threw the dice. They said conditions where we are, economic conditions or religious conditions, are not to our liking. We will take a risk. We will take a physical risk as well as an economic risk. Get on this leaky boat, sail off across one of the most dangerous oceans on Earth, land on a continent that has almost no infrastructure, full of different cultures that would probably like to kill us in our sleep, and we'll see if we can make a go of it. The people who did that were self-selecting for courage. They were not fearful. And today, we're terrified of everything. Well,
let's parse that out a bit. Firstly, I will say the archetypical traveler going across the Atlantic in the 17th century, I think there was a fair amount of trickery going on here. So you could say the people, besides being courageous, were also naive and easily misled and possibly a bit too trusting. So the story that was presented, if you were a peasant in 17th century England, there's a paradise out there, 50 acres of land, I mean, whatever, you can, eat hamburgers every day, whatever it is. There's just a great paradise, and so there was a lot of misinformation that was put out there. But it is
my favorite one of those was from our very own colony here in Georgia, describing Georgia as, if I remember correctly, the fairest, fruitfulest, and most pleasant land that had ever been laid out by God. And if you imagine, they're showing up here in the summer, in August, wearing wool with no off, no raid, no air conditioning, and wearing wool clothes in the swamps of St. Simons or Savannah, and imagine what it's like.
Well, you could go into it's a whole other subject about how whatever the national character was formed by the initial trickery or courage or naivete or whatever. Yes. So the conditions were quite terrible, and the death rates were extraordinary, which is another question. The people that came over, huge numbers of them died. And it'd be a whole nother discussion about the sacrifices people made to come here, but that's time for another time. Well, just to continue on the, I'll just make a few latch on to some of your comments. So the politicians can often set the national dialogue. And the communication, Franklin Roosevelt had a wonderful voice, and he used the radio, and it was very reassuring. And Norman Lincoln Rockwell's paintings were so powerful, and the idea is somehow this had been ingrained, and this is something that's there. Now, fearful men, I think fear is a part of a human condition. And if you don't have some degree of fear about things, then you'll have your hand chopped off pretty easily, or whatever it is, some bad things will happen to you. So there's a balance, but restraint or concern for reality, maybe you could phrase it that way, is an appropriate intellectual quality, and it's a good one. I mean, you don't want to do anything that's particularly stupid. However, there's a limit to it, and what happens is that you can be consumed by an emotion that will paralyze you, and so where it's like everything, it's an existentialist word, meaning that when in daily discussions, people would say, well, he's an idiot, or he's whatever, he's a genius, or whatever they would say, or he's brave, or he's a coward. But there are all gradations of this going back and forth in reality, and so there's qualities of fear. When society is under a lot of stress, then the government really puffs its chest out a bit in order to assume its role as a protector. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in the Depression, and he exercised what's needed as a leader when the micro decisions are being made out everywhere. The people are taking their money out of banks, or they're going to bury their money in the backyard. So it's important for the government personified by the leader to try and reassure people. And then the other thing would be in World War II. So the idea is if these alien forces come in, they'll shoot you and put you in concentration camps, and you'll die, and awful things will happen. You'll be tortured. So the government is saying, don't worry about it. We're your protectors. Now, where this, I think, gets a bit more complicated is the government can also use this ingrained human quality to extract power, or extract your connivance in their plans or their policies, and it often can be done in a sinister fashion. So you could say, well, I'm fearful of this, I'm fearful for that. An example might be, and it's very complicated, but let's say build a wall, whatever that story is, so people are frightened, and I mean, I won't get too much into that. There are pros and cons back and forth. But build a wall, we're fearful of new people coming in, we're going to stop. I mean, that's one side of the story. Certainly another one, but that can play itself out. And so that'd be, support me and I will protect you because you're afraid of different forces. And you could also say, I'm worried about economic arrangements, or I'm worried about my health care. I'm frightened, I'm worried, I'm fearful that that things I need I can't obtain. And if the government will therefore say, I'm your protector, and so that, I'll submit, it's kind of a slippery slope when you get into what the government can and would protect you from. Additionally, and I think you're prepared to speak on this, is that the different kinds of things that we should be frightened of are, it would be reasonable to be statistical dangers, rational things, trying to put risk-benefit ratios out. And often it is possible to put one thing is particular danger, and it's not really such a huge danger statistically. And I think you were going to just discuss shootings.
Yes. Well, before I do that, let me back way up a minute when you talked about a certain amount of fear being healthy and not to take foolhardy risks. And I agree completely, but that reminded me of that wonderful line. Do you know what the famous 4 last words in the American South are?
No.
Hey, y'all, watch this. So,
Hey, y'all,
yes.
is that more than 4? Y'all turns out to be 1. Okay.
Of course, it's wonderful plural second person.
It's out of the King James Bible.
Or the other one is here, hold my beer.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, that's a good one, too.
Yes.
I like that.
But you mentioned World War II, and once again to back up, the War of the Worlds panic immediately come to mind. And a lot of this, I think, is fostered by American media. And I think a lot of that is just designed to generate ratings. The number of times where I see news flash coming up on Fox or on CNN or MSNBC, and the news flash is Khloe Kardashian makes public statement on the new dieting fad.
Right.
And so
it's not irrelevant.
Yes,
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And so what would be appropriate, you could make the case, which I think is sort of a powerful thing to say, is that we're so much under the impact of the media, whatever that is, which
Yes.
we didn't have 100 years ago. It was a very different situation, the way communication was occurring. Maybe some occasional newspapers, some occasional books, mostly word of mouth stories.
Yes.
I mean, and even occasionally that.
And it was slower. It was
very difficult to manipulate things. So now things are manipulated. I think that's a fair statement.
Yes.
And the notion of fear out there is one of the things the media manipulates. And it's a bit boring to be totally rational all the time. If you want to communicate, maybe you sense that as a university professor. It's a bit boring to rationally try. I mean, people would much rather, I don't know, whatever it is, watch football or get excited about football or
Yes.
whatever.
We need a little detachment. And staying with World War II, the fear of a lot of people that the Japanese were going to invade the West Coast right after Pearl Harbor. The Japanese were just about as likely to invade Mars as to invade our West Coast.
Or,
They
or
didn't.
maybe Hawaii. They might have gone after Hawaii.
I don't think really. I mean, their plans were to prevent us from sticking our nose into East Asia. So I don't think they had either the will or the ability.
Well, I will never kill that. They might. It could have been if they follow-up attack, or maybe midway. The idea was trying to lure the fleet out and destroy it totally. And maybe if you look at the Japanese peripheral perimeter, so we're off subject, but
yeah, we are.
It could have been if they'd. It could have been an ambition.
But the point is that people were panicking, and I think over no reason at all. But for instance, in the wake of these tragic, very recent shootings we've had, the El Paso shooting, the Dayton shooting, a few days after the Dayton shooting, there was a motorcycle backfire in Times Square, and people panicked and ran.
Yes.
Broadway shows had to stop as
Yes.
people ran into the lobbies, and so that kind of fear, it has its own, and if you'll pardon the phrase, hair trigger. And I think the fact that the media plays that up. Are assault weapons dangerous? Yes. Can they kill a lot of people at once? Yes. But if you look at the number of people killed in these shootings, how many people were killed in Chicago in the past 3 weeks? I'm sure
A huge number, yes.
that it equals or greatly exceeds the number of people killed in the mass shooting. And yet people get into their ideas, we're all going to die in a mass shooting. You probably have much greater chance of being killed in an automobile wreck on your way home tonight than being killed in a mass shooting.
Well, just to go through this a bit, so every brain, in my opinion, has its vulnerabilities. There are keys to get in the brain, and so a lurid picture of one type or another, someone, just small child that's dead on the street, that's so powerful. The image of that goes right in, and reading a dry number like 307 people were killed last year in St. Louis with whatever it is.
Picture worth 1,000 words.
Or poisoned, or botulism killed 59 million people, whatever the story is. That doesn't get in the brain as easily as this sort of almost a story. So that people are attracted to that the same way they might be in Neolithic times, around the fire.
Yes.
And people are programmed to hear they're sitting there, the fire is there, they're roasting some kangaroo or whatever, and the sun sets, and they're telling stories, and people are hypnotized about that. It goes right in the brain. It's easy to get it in there, I think, with these little vignettes like the shootings. And the issue is, in this, it is so easy to manipulate people after anything like this happens, any story of whatever. Well, you could say, I don't know, an illegal immigrant kills 3 people or whatever, one story like that. What are the statistics? What is the issue? Very easy to manipulate people. And there's a song, "What love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage."
Yes.
Well, fear and hate go together the same way. So it's such a powerful human emotion. So it's so easy to, I'm so frightened of, I don't know, cave bears. And I hate cave bears, or I'm intruders or whatever, and why don't you mobilize under my banner for whatever the banner is, and we'll turn that fear into hate, and that hate into my personal power, says the manipulator, or says the TV host. I'll get millions I'll really be able to express your sense of fear, and thus I'll turn it into hate. And then you'll watch me on television a lot, I'll make a lot of money, and I'll have a cadre of people. And politicians play the same game.
Yes.
And it also begs the question, Americans are our species, are we rational enough to actually participate in this complicated world? In other words, can we dissect out what these false trumpet sounds?
Yes.
Can we do that successfully? And it might be very difficult to do it.
I don't know if we can or not. And once again, modern technology has done this too, with picture worth 1,000 words, with video cameras almost literally everywhere now. Pull out your cell phone. You probably remember the shock of seeing the Rodney King beating, which was a new phenomenon
yes.
at that time.
Yes.
I mean, not that the beatings were new; the beatings had been going on. But the phenomenon was that you could see it. You had documentary evidence of it, and now it's everywhere. Any shooting, somebody's going to pull out his cell phone, and so that makes the threat seem a lot more constant, a lot more imminent. It gives the politicians a lot more talking points. So. What do you do with that? Well, I would argue that as an educator, that freedom of speech, freedom from fear, any of these, that the first line of defense against it is an educated public. And what if the people do not wish to be educated, or horrors cannot be educated? What do you do at that point? Does that mean we have to have the paternal state? Does that mean that you're too stupid to govern yourself, so I will have to govern you for your own good? Where does that take us?
It's an interesting question.
It's not a very American idea.
It's a very interesting question. And one of the things in our discussion is our little soap bubble. We're in this, and then how are we going to work this out with all the other soap bubbles pushing against us? And so we give power to we all come together and shake hands. We're going to surrender something. We're going to give it to an external power, the government. And the government is going to be a righteous arbitrator with all the little soap bubbles pushing against other arrangements. But the question is, can they be a righteous arbitrator, or is it like an Animal Farm kind of story where people pretend to be a righteous arbitrator or protector, and then they actually become an oppressor? And they use the power that fearful people give them to actually abuse the people that surrender this power.
Yes.
And they do it by taking all pretenses for rational discussion away. They make intellectual interchange or probing what's true and not true. They take it away from the individual person.
Yes.
They make it impossible to have that kind of discussion, and because of these emotions that are played upon so powerfully. It's interesting to me. I mean, you could say, well, people shoot people, they do this, they do that. But the real danger, which is another time for another discussion, is something called white nationalism, which we really need to parse those words out. I'm not sure what it means. But basically, it's the sort of the fear that I guess Caucasians might injure you, and thus they need to be restrained the same way, the same kind of story with Islamic people, Islamic terrorists, or you could say black nationalists, white nationalists, black nationalists, whatever the group is that's out there. The politicians and the media are seen to be playing on this intrinsic human emotion, which is very easy to engage.
The reptile brain, and we've talked about this a little bit before. You're the specialist in this. I'm not. But I would like to say, and we're moving into the racism aspect a little bit here, but that's often a source of fear. Am I right in saying that the human brain is really hardwired to see any other human who is at some visible level different? Skin color is the most obvious. You can spot that a mile away, but
Yes.
also style of dress, accent, culture, that we are hardwired to see the other as potential threat. You are not of my tribe, and what if you come in and take my food or my genetic partner? Therefore, I have to defend myself and my tribe against you.
Yes, indeed.
So-
And I'll say yes, indeed. And so this is one of the human imperfections that we need to be aware of and at least understand. And so the idea to say, well, firstly, humans are tremendously intelligent. They make great decisions all the time. They're very kind, generous, nice. Well, that maybe in some circles, some circumstances, that can be the case, but particularly when they're under these emotions we spoke about are very easily manipulated. You could say the Nazis the way they really played that card very well in their ascent to power. But it's certainly people generalize, often incorrectly. It takes a tremendous amount of intellectual energy to really parse out good and evil, who's good, who's bad, and the generalizations are so easy to perform. So this person is different than I am, ergo, it must be, I better be fearful of the person. The person might injure me in some way or injure my tribe. And I think it is also fair to say that the way that genetics work and Darwinian selection or whatever, you get different, in the broadest sense of the word, different entities get into different environments and they get different characteristics and they compete with other entities in the same way that football teams might. Mm-hmm. And you could say the idea is very strongly ingrained and appropriate restraint is necessary. You could say, for instance, well, we're terrified of the Chinese. They're going to do this or they're going to do that, and or any external force. So that's something that's out there, and to pretend that is just a temporary malfunction that could easily be just changed just like that, snap your fingers, and the brain will never act that way again. The only reason it acted that way, it was being manipulated by some other force. True enough, it has been manipulated, but that quality of humanity is persistent and, in my opinion, never-ending, and that's what we ought to be aware of. So you could make the case that if you imagine that you can make things work with lots of different opinions, some places you can under some circumstances, not impossible, but it's a high mountain to climb routinely.
I was, we're at the 50th, hard to believe, the 50th anniversary of the Manson murders this month. And looking at how easily Manson led the members of his family and how even after he got jailed, members of the family continued to act out and do terrible things for years thereafter. And you do have to worry about this dark side of human nature that's always combating the voice of reason, which brings us right back to where we began, freedom from fear.
Yes. Well, on that note, Bucky, thank you once again for your enlightened comments here, and I'll remind the viewing audience that Dr. Melton is a potential vice presidential candidate, and we'll let you know where to send the money at our next
Don't do
conversation.
Don't do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Bucky.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.